Hey guys, can you see me? Is this working? I think this is working. This is the first time I've used this system, so bear with me. I'm a newbie here, and I'm just checking to see. There's a little bit of a delay, so let's see. Are you guys seeing me? Can somebody? There we go. Yes, we figured it out. Hi. How's everybody doing? This has been a little bit of a crazy day, I think, for many of us, an emotional day for a lot of us. My situation, I took the last hour and just sat there and reflected on the last, frankly, 5 years of my life being involved in the Bernie Sanders campaign and the movement that has really been closely aligned with the Bernie Sanders campaign. And I think a lot of folks are coming to terms with a few things that we did not accomplish everything that we thought we could accomplish or would accomplish, that the establishment is really flexing their muscles right now in ways that we just didn't think were imaginable, and ultimately that it's on us now. It's really not about Bernie leading us in the right direction. It's not about a presidential campaign. It's about the movement growing, organizing, strategizing, doing their research, and taking over. I'm on Twitter and I'm seeing a lot of conversations that are very similar to the conversations that came out of 2016. Conversations about forming a third party, about not voting, about showing the Democrats the force of our voting bloc. And I hear you. I definitely feel your pain on this. But I also want to take a step back and talk about the long-term goals here. I was on the Majority Report earlier today. You may have catched it, and if you haven't, definitely go back and watch it because it's worth it, the second half, in which I joined with Jamie Peck and Michael Brooks and Sam Cedar. And we had a very hearty discussion about the media and about the Democratic establishment and platforms that we stand for as a movement and the Bernie Sanders campaign. And one thing I'll say about campaigns moving forward is that we have to be very militant about how we conduct ourselves. We have to have a deep understanding of who our enemy is. And I think that's something that Bernie didn't really ever get. I think that we in the movement are getting better at it, but we have to truly understand what we're dealing with when we're dealing with the Democratic National Committee. They don't govern local elections. They're not local parties. There's different rules in every single state. There's different laws in every single state, and there are different legislative makeups in every single state. The DNC has a tremendous amount of power when it comes to fund allocation, whether or not a candidate is in the insider circle, access to donors and to media and to legitimacy. And the DNC sets the rules for the presidential primary, where the biggest chunk of money is to be made. That's why, presidential elections are billion-dollar elections, and it's why Barack Obama, under his leadership, lost 1,000 seats, legislatively, because they moved that money to his presidential campaigns almost exclusively. And it was a great moneymaker for consultants. I'm going to be doing my show comes out tomorrow, and you're going to see my opening. I talk about this, but I wanted to talk to you today just because this is like a really important moment. So I see things like Dem exit, and I see things like third party, and trust me, I hear you, and I have thought about these things in depth. I am probably at the top of the DNC's hit list. No joke. I mean, they've already gone after me. What am I talking about? The top of their hit list. They've already hit me. I am no longer on cable news every day. I used to go on every single day. They very effectively smeared me in my public advocate campaign, to the point where I've had to take legal action. They're really good at unleashing trolls and negative articles about people, and they've tried to cancel a lot of very important people in Bernie Sanders' movement. They're extremely strategic, but it's not like they make up the majority. The establishment is a pretty small group of people who have access to megaphones and have access to the levers of power because they've been very strategic about gaining access to those levers of power. You know, they obviously have corporate media on their side because they're the same people who are taking and representing the same corporations. But we also have to know who those people are. So my homework for you right now would be to do a little bit more research. You know, the way that after 2016, so many of us joined ESA and started to read the works of Marx and you know, have DSA socialist reading groups and have been reading history, and, you know, folks who actually studied history started podcasts and educated the movement about how the working class has suffered and been defeated and attacked. On the same wave, we have to do the research about who our enemies are right now. You know, I have absolutely no sympathy for organizations that parade and fundraise, and candidates who parade and fundraise off of being progressives, but do not have actual solidarity when it matters. The ones who think, okay, well, how can I play it both ways? How can I support this candidate and then later support that candidate? How can I go after progressive candidates when we're supposed to be working in solidarity? That's not solidarity, that's bullshit. That is a grift, that's an organizational grift, and 9 times out of 10, maybe even 10 times out of 10, those organizations are not democratically run. They don't go to their members for votes. They don't have a decentralized structure. They are cutting backroom deals about, you know, trying to figure out how they're going to fund their budget, you know, for the rest of the year, and hide the fact that they're taking corporate money. This is how it works. You know, the progressive movement that America and the world has seen, much of the world has seen in the last 4 years, partly and largely because Bernie Sanders mainstreamed it. It wasn't all him. It was a collective of organizations and activists and movements. I said that in 2016. You know, that was my big line. He is a collective of movements that got us to that point. He was the vehicle for us. But, you know, it's going to take a deeper level of sophistication and strategy to defeat the establishment. I mean, they're driving our democracy right now, our pseudo-democracy. They're driving everything. They set the rules for the Democratic Party primary, presidential primary, and then they expect the same small group of voters that got them the nomination with the rules that they wrote to elect them in the general election. We all know that that's bullshit. They think that they are going to rely on our votes because in the face of Trump, you know, we have to turn out. So I hear you when you say you want to start a third party. I hear you when you say burn it down, Dem exit. But I also know that this is a really small group of people, and most of them have never been exposed. Most of them know that they get away with this because they operate behind closed doors. Most of them, actually most politicians have been called out for, you know, the money that they've taken. It's really hurt their careers. I mean, look at Cory Booker. Remember a couple of years ago when the movement started to expose all the pharma money he was taking? It really hurt him. And he's a young leader, and he was, you know, positioning himself as being a progressive, but the money that he was taking was proving otherwise. And he really found himself in a tough position when he ran for president. So we have a lot of work to do. We have to understand the landscape. We have to understand that it's going to be hard, but different now. We don't have the Bernie Sanders movement. Bernie Sanders raised more money than ever in a presidential primary. Bernie Sanders had more small dollar donations and volunteers knocking on doors than any presidential primary candidate in the Democratic side, at least. I can't speak for the Republicans and, you know, Trump's pseudo operation over there. But that has to be mobilized into something else. And whether or not Bernie guides us moving forward into where we should mobilize or not, I think all of us have to look within ourselves and say, how can I contribute? How can I help my ally here? How can I work with my neighbor here? How can I talk to my family member who is may not agree with me on politics all the time, or some of the time, or never. But we have to figure out where our common ground is. The movement has to be a movement that represents Black Lives Matter leaders and, white male union workers in Wisconsin who may have voted for Trump. Because that's what it's going to take to defeat the establishment. It's going to take actual solidarity. It's going to take holding organizations that, claim to be progressive, holding their feet to the fire, not just in the moment, not just on Twitter that day, not just when it's trending, but using our power to say, no, that's enough. We've had enough of this. You might be supporting this candidate in a local race, but you did not support us when we needed you in a national race. And does that local race even need them? We also understand what our power is. Some of these organizations, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this, because some of these organizations that say they're progressive are actually offering their endorsements, but then, as Emily's listed and the DCCC did, and that was all uncovered, they're using the same exact model. They offer their endorsements, and then they swoop into a campaign, tell the campaign what to do. And often cases, these campaigns these candidates have never run for office before. And then sometimes they have to pay these organizations to run their field programs. And the funny thing is that the organizations may not even have field programs. They might be using DSA members to turn out and taking credit for their work. If you're not a decentralized organization, if you are not an organization that has members that inform your endorsements or policies, you're not an organization really to be trusted at this point. I mean, it's not like if you're going to sit there and tell a campaign how to run itself, as a candidate, as an organizer, I think it's important that we have conversations about this, because there are a lot of Democratic consultants and people who are campaign managers and have worked on campaigns for years who could tell many stories about how some of these organizations come in, help supposedly, but then somehow sabotage the campaign with bad advice or not handling certain things properly. And sometimes the candidates don't even realize it. You can build your own organizing power. You can really work with the tools that we have available pre-COVID and hopefully after COVID to build your own power base. We have to stop relying on a candidate or a big organization to come in and save us. Sometimes that happens and it works, and that's fantastic. But to build a really solid movement, we really need to understand our path forward, who our actual enemies are, what their pressure points are, and who are the ones that are most vulnerable. We love to attack big names, attack Joe Biden, but they're going to defend him. He has real sexual assault allegations against him right now, substantiated, and the press isn't touching it. But, we have to look at their organizing the way that they look at ours. They went after a lot of Bernie people that were key staffers in 2016 that are no longer around. They've been canceled, they've been erased, they've been smeared. And they did that because they were, they were essentially weapons for Bernie Sanders against the establishment. The establishment neutralized some organizations into not endorsing, some unions into not endorsing. They won over some organizations that claimed to be progressive and put them into Warren's camp. That was all strategic. So for such a small group of people to have that power, they're not representing the masses, but we can't look at them like they're the end-all be-all. They're vulnerable too. They are humans. This is not like, AT&T deciding how our elections run. This is some lobbyists and consultants, for the most part, who represent maybe these companies, but they also represent many companies who nobody knows the names of, who have their own histories, who are human, who are vulnerable, who lash out on Twitter, who drink wine at night and get angry. They're humans too. Do you see what I'm saying here? This is war. in war, we actually have to differentiate ourselves from our opponents. There's too much on the line right now. There's way too much on the line for us to sit back and say, oh, let's start a third party. Okay, great. Let me see the plan. Are you going to get on the ballot in the next 4 months in the majority of Republican legislative states? Is that going to work? Guys, we have to be real. We have to be real. There are like 30 people in the DNC, which is a membership in the several hundreds, 400 and something, 35. There are like a handful of people that are chosen by Tom Perez who are literally writing the rules of the primary, and we're like, oh my God, the DNC is controlling us. That's bullshit. Tom Perez barely won the vote of the DNC against Keith Ellison. And he only won because Barack Obama swept in and made phone calls to win over the votes to Tom Perez. It is way closer than we think. And I am angry and frustrated, and you know, there are so many lessons to be learned out of this campaign and assess the campaign strategy, but it's not what I want to focus on right now. What I want to focus on is how each and every one of us need to step up and work together and cut this canceling bullshit. Seriously, they want to divide us. They want to divide us. We can't always have our feelings hurt online because of Joe Rogan coming into the circle or whatever the excuses are. We have to realize that in order for this movement to be effective against these extremely strategic, callous, moralless consultant class that's controlling the mechanisms of power right now and the media, we cannot afford to pick stupid fights. Do we all want to have this world? Do we want the Democratic Party to be in a big tent where everybody is accepted and everybody's on the same page about all of our platform? Absolutely. But we also need to meet people where they are. We can't push people away because we are personally, you know how many times I'm personally offended by things? And I mean, we know those feelings, right? You have to sometimes pick your battles. Sometimes the battles are worth fighting, sometimes they are not. Right now, we need to grow the movement and strategize. I have a few questions here. Let's see. We are a movement now. Okay, so this is from Justin D. We are a movement now. This will not stop. Just look around us. Reality was endorsing Bernie, exactly. We have to remember we are fighting for everyone, even the centrist sellouts. Green New Deal. If we don't have a livable planet, it's all over for us. I could not agree more. If we want a Green New Deal, we need to make sure that the Progressive Caucus, which claims to be progressive, is feeling the heat when they're not progressive. That those members of the Progressive Caucus who supported Joe Biden, and there are several, or those members of the Progressive Caucus who take pharmaceutical money or oil money or any, shady corporate money, any corporate money in my opinion, that they're feeling the heat because they do feel it. A congressman from Arizona or from North Dakota or from Florida that claims to be progressive but is still dancing with Biden and still dancing with corporations, let me tell you, they feel the heat. And on top of that, while we're at it, let's continue with this path moving forward. There are so many progressives who are running for Congress right now and for many seats all over the country. The reason why Congress is sort of the sweet spot is because, the districts are usually manageable enough. And the races, they can be very expensive depending on where you are, but if you start early enough and you have a strategic campaign and a fundraising operation, you could probably build a real campaign with a couple $100,000 rather than, $2 million the way it used to be. But, you have to be very thoughtful about this. And the way you do that is by having a team that has done it before, that really knows what they're doing, that is strategic. And we just don't have that bench right now. We as a movement have tons of progressives running across the country who cannot find the experienced staff, not just because of the blacklist. It actually goes way deeper. It's because we're a growing movement, and a lot of us are new to this movement. So, you know, if you want to get involved in campaigns, I definitely recommend that you work on campaigns a little bit. And then, you know, hopefully rise into campaign manager or spokesperson or fundraising or general consultant or field director. But it really does take experience, because they'll outsmart you. And I think sometimes, you know, campaigns will be like, well, I need to find a woman to do this, or I need to find a person of color to do this, and I need to find, and that's really, 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 really important. No doubt. I mean, I feel you, because I'm part of Matriarch, and we want to bring in all female experienced campaign staff to advise our candidates. And it's hard because the infrastructure is not as broad as it should be at this point. But with that being said, experience is really important. Not to the point where they're like taking advantage of you, because there's definitely that too. But we really need to develop our bench of support with our bench of candidates. We need to be running for DNC positions in states. I mean, New York is really tough, is very, very tough, because Cuomo controls it. But in pretty much every other state in America, it is pretty accessible to run for DNC position and win. There's a growing caucus in the DNC that has definitely flexed its power recently. And it's only going to happen more so because there are journalists now paying attention to how the DNC functions. They weren't before. And that's where the sausage is made. That's where they set the rules of the primary. You know, it was unheard of like 2 years ago to cover the rules committee of the DNC. And now there are reporters who are doing the work in researching who's on the rules committee, which is, of course, not elected. It's appointed by Tom Perez. These are the people standing in the way. Do you understand what I'm saying? When I talk about the DNC, I'm saying, listen, there is a handful of names that are publicly available, and these are the folks that are standing in the way of progressives. A handful. Or the alternative is we spend the next 15 years focusing almost exclusively on building a new party, in which we first have to somehow take over legislatures to do that in many states. We need to make sure that the movement's a unit and is larger to do that. And I can tell you just from political experience, you're probably not going to move over the entire movement that we have right now to a third party. And then somehow, even if we do have a third party, we will be called the spoilers, whether or not we are or not. We will be called the spoilers when there's an important tight election, and give Republicans, who really should have absolutely no control at this point, because they don't have the numbers, but they've been very strategic about taking over legislatures and gerrymandering and you know, stacking the courts. We would basically hand them another 10 to 15 years of power. Or you could look at the Democratic Party today. We have to stop acting like outsiders and take over from within. We have the numbers. We are almost there. We are even closer than we were, you know, 2 years ago under Ellison. The numbers within the DNC. And I say DNC because that's where the rules are written. So you want to take over the party, you got to take over the membership. Take over the membership by running, by knowing who your DNC member is and challenging them. Most people probably don't even know who their DNC member is. And you know what? That person, if they're a bad person, probably has never been challenged from the left. And maybe people in your community would be like, oh, hey, that sounds like a great person to have as my DNC member. Maybe I should vote for the person on the left rather than the person I didn't even know was taking pharmaceutical money. No, I'm not saying get behind. Okay, thank you. Good question. So question from 1-2. Okay, thanks 1-2. You have a picture though. Love you, but are you telling us to get behind Biden? Not quite following, sorry. No, I'm really talking about moving forward as a movement. You know, there's a lot of conversation about building a third party. There's a lot of conversation about Dem exit. I hear those arguments. I really feel those arguments. But I also think that we've gone through this a few times, and we have to learn from history, and we have to learn from organizing and movement building. And people who've really done the work on building infrastructure, organizing on the ground, know how much work it is just to get people into your circle. And, you know, I think some of the biggest issues that we're facing right now are that folks are not acting in solidarity. We're getting played a lot. And it's very hard to organize people when you have factions fighting against each other. And so, you know, how are we going to be able to take on the enemy? Listen, the establishment, which I'm going to repeat, is just a small group of people who nobody knows the names of, but the names are out there, who barely feel any public pressure. That establishment, kind of led by Center for American Progress, you know, that establishment is really happy when we are all fighting with each other. They're really happy when AOC gets mad about Joe Rogan. They're really happy when, you know, the Warren progressives are fighting against the Bernie progressives. And I know what you're thinking there. Okay, so from Zach. Hey, Zach, thanks for the question. Can we put voting at the bottom of priorities and build direct action movements like the Civil Rights Movement, Labor Rights Movement circa Industrial Revolution, or perhaps the Catalonia circa 1936? No, because I think we have to do both at the same time. You know, the thing that all of those had in some way or form was, well, maybe not the Civil Rights Movement as much, but it was a coalition. They had unions. And unions are definitely weaker than they've been since we've been able to organize in this country. And unions have sort of played the same game that the DNC has played, in that membership feels weakened in many unions, not all, because the leadership is really circumnavigating their power and cutting deals with these Democratic brokers. I think we all know at this point that the Democratic Party has been the party to suppress the workers' side and to keep the right in power. Does that seem fair? Do we all agree with that? Why don't we join the Green Party? Because the Green Party isn't structurally set up. I mean, yes, they're not structurally set up for a presidential election. They're not structurally set up for midterm elections. They're not structurally set up for legislative elections. And if we split off from the Democratic Party as progressives, we've basically divided a coalition that's a really, you know, strange coalition, and handed power to Republicans. I don't really want to be in a party with lobbyists, but there aren't that many of them. The majority of Democrats are actually not lobbyists. I think, surprise, the majority of the DNC members are not lobbyists. There are a lot of DNC members who are good people, who are even union members, but maybe a little bit older. Maybe they live in the South and they remember what it's like when Democrats didn't have power, and they see the establishment as the electable faction. I don't agree with it, but it doesn't mean that that person is a bad person. And so splitting this very strange coalition that we have that is fueled by a generational divide is going to give more power to Republicans who already strategically designed their power over the last 30 years. They, you know, decided to put money into winning back state legislative seats conveniently at a time when the Democrats decided to pull away from that process and pull away from unions and take corporate money. I mean, I think that the Democratic establishment was strategically setting themselves up to work hand in hand with the Republicans. We're talking the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, the New Democrats. This is Clintonian, Gore, you know, the Biden. You know, they were all a part of this in the late 70s and early 80s. And so, you know, we are now dealing with a landscape that has been operating and structuring themselves in 10-year chunks. And so we're facing redistricting now. And we are now sitting in a situation where Republicans can very likely control the legislatures for another 10 years because the Democrats, you know, didn't put any money to state parties again and win back those legislatures because it was easier for them to throw billions of dollars to a handful of consultants who conveniently also happen to represent a lot of Republican interests. See what's going on here? One big party and we ain't in it. Okay, so question from Texas progressives. I like that. Lawrence O'Donnell on MSDNC said a major party will move towards you if you threaten not to vote for their establishment candidate. Held our nose for HRC, not again. I think that was the case with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was that threat. That was the threat. And I don't actually agree with the premise that Lawrence O'Donnell says. I don't think the DNC wants to win against Trump. You're going to see that in my opening tomorrow when it comes out. I don't think the DNC wants to win against Trump. If they wanted to win, okay, fine. I hear you. We could exercise our power. But, you know, the power only works if they want the power, right? If they need us. There's a lot of money to be made in losing elections. There's a lot of money to be made in being the opposition party. There's a lot of grifting. There's a lot of organizations that popped up after Trump. Remember the Klippenstein brothers or Krasenstein brothers? Oh my God, sorry, Ken. It's a problem with Ken is that Ken Klippenstein is that he got that in my head. But the Krasenstein brothers, I mean, they had a grift. Scott Dworkin had a grift. You know, there's a lot of folks who are just looking for their next venture along the way, and they'll raise millions of dollars from the same network of donors that supported Hillary Clinton, and she funds them. And suddenly it's this ecosystem of being, you know, anti-Trump. And there's also a lot of good work that was done after Trump. A lot of great organizing in coalitions like the AntiIDZ Coalition. You know, that's a situation where you had Democrats wake up and say, oh my God, I need to understand process. What do you mean my legislature in New York is not democratic? And so you had Hillary people partnering up with Bernie people, forming a coalition to defeat the IDC. People didn't even know what the IDC was, and they've been operating for basically 10 years. So that is a great example of getting involved in process. Once we focus, once we know who the bad actors are, and we say, oh my God, it's just like 8 idiot senators that, you know, are reading from scripts and have no organizing on the ground, we can do this. We can organize. It's going to take a year. It's going to take a year and a half. But it happened, and the IDC was defeated. So that's the kind of work, and that's in New York. And New York is a very, very difficult state to break through because the rules are set up to basically suppress the votes of anybody that is not lockstep with the establishment. So it was a tremendous success defeating the IDC and winning back the state Senate. So in the situation of like the DNC, I mean, we could do the same thing. We should do it with the Progressive Caucus. You know, who cares about the DNC blacklist or the DCCC blacklist? Nobody on our side ever used those consultants anyways. Oh God, we're gonna refuse to support your challenger races. Okay, since when does a DCCC consultant ever work with challengers? So it was just, you know, it was a complete play to get some press attention and show the divide. So we have the opportunity here to really exercise our power in a way that's going to get us some big wins on a local level. It's much more achievable when we get down to basics, when we start challenging a little bit more locally, when we work on campaigns and get some experience so that there's an ecosystem out there where if a candidate's running in a state that may not have, you know, a lot of organizing because the Democrats ignored that state for the last, you know, 10 years, then, you know, you need to build that infrastructure. There's a lot of candidates across the country you can't find campaign staff because there's just not enough there. So I urge you guys to get involved on races, learn how, if you're not already doing so, learn how campaigns function, volunteer a couple of times, work on campaigns, junior, work your way up. I mean, that's what I did. I started when I was a kid. I mean, there's only a couple roles in campaigns I haven't really played, but, you know, I started stuffing envelopes when they still did that. I was, you know, making phone calls at union halls. I was knocking on doors with my mom in like rural districts where there were guns and there were dogs coming to attack you. I did a Latino vote effort in Arizona in 2006. I did Young Democrats. We organized, in 2006 as well when we won back the House. I did fundraising. I did communications. A big chunk of my work has been in communications. So it's just, you know, it doesn't mean that I wanted to be a professional consultant. I didn't, and clearly that's not what I do. But that's where I pull my whatever knowledge I have from so that I can help you guys out. So, all right, we have another question. Yeah, we got that question. I got Justin D. All right, I'm learning how this works, guys. I am a DNC toady. I'm not. If that were the case, then I wouldn't be on their hit list, guys. I am just saying I understand how it works. And if they hold all the power, we have to understand what they're doing to hold that power. If you're going to war with someone, and that's who we're at war with, you don't say, oh, I'm just going to start my own country. That doesn't work that way. The rules of our democracy have been structured by these players, right? And the DNC is working essentially with Republicans, the power brokers in the DNC. are the foils. Just like the IDC was a foil. So yes, it's an abusive relationship. I hear you guys, but I'm sorry, but tell me, how are you going to take over the House of Representatives with a progressive caucus if we don't have the largest movement possible in solidarity? Bernie Sanders grew the largest movement in modern electoral history on the progressive side, working class movement on the Democratic side. He did that without any corporate money, with barely any positive media coverage in the mainstream press. He did that breaking down barriers like campaign finance. He did it off of a collection of millions of $19 donations. He did it with thousands and thousands of volunteers knocking on doors. And if he got this close, it still didn't win, how are we going to build another ecosystem that divides the party? You know, there are a lot of, I think we don't recognize there are a lot of loyal Democrats that support Bernie Sanders, union members, a lot of activists that have been Democrats their whole life. They're frustrated with the party. Some of them have experience with the party. And there were a lot that we probably could have won over. You have to, you're right, Rosa Luxemburg, of course, you have to primary and unite grassroots orgs and unions. If you don't do that, if you say, I'm gonna start my own party, that's not uniting. Solidarity means uniting in lockstep and knowing who your enemy is and not being afraid to challenge the enemy in lockstep. Understanding the landscape, having a strategy. I'm gonna say it over and over, having a strategy. And not getting distracted by like the news of the day always. Sometimes it's just not worth it. So read your super. Jonathan, ask the question again. Wait, I don't see it in the super chat. I'm really this is a new thing for me. I apologize. Super chat is, oh wait, is that it? I'm new to super chat, so you have to be patient with me. You're catching me in a very heated moment. Jonathan, can you just ask the chat the question again? I don't see it in the super chat. It doesn't show up. I don't know. Jimmy Dore would destroy this tools. I don't, of course he would, but Jimmy Dore has never worked in, I mean, I love Jimmy, he's a very good friend. He's also never worked in politics. So you're gonna go to the advice from the person who doesn't understand the rules of the game or someone who's actually done it. I'm on the hit list of the DNC. I don't think that they're looking to me as like their ally right now or ever. They effectively kicked me out of many things, I'll just say that. So we have to be more strategic. I am committed to reforming the system, and this is something that Michael Brooks and I talked about today, is that it's not gonna happen just through the right message or the right policies. It's really gonna happen by being tactical. And we need to, basically, in terms of tactics, we have to be a little bit more cutthroat. So I don't know where the super chat is, but what I'm gonna do, I apologize everybody, this is a new thing for me, and I'm planning to do super chats on Thursday night. So that's when I'm gonna have my assistants. It's a very new process for me. We have a new show, by the way, coming out tomorrow. It's on Patreon. So if you're not a patron already, go to patreon.com/The Nomi Key Show. My opening goes through all this a little bit more in depth. And then it's going to go up on YouTube right after, because things are happening in such a timely manner right now. But I really appreciate you all. Join ESA Sunshine. I'm reading everybody's. Yes, we need to make sure that we join all these organizations, but also, you know, the left-leaning organizations that aren't democratically run, we need to make sure that they are. It's not fair. Make sure to join Matriarch. We're supporting progressive, working class female candidates running for Congress right now. We had a town hall 2 nights ago, and it was pretty powerful stuff, very powerful. So with that, you guys are great. Take a minute, you know, treat yourself well today if you can. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay inside. This is just the beginning. Remember that this is about us rising to the occasion now. This is about what we can do, because Bernie took us here with his movement and the movements that supported him, but we have to, you know, really make sure that the road is clear for future generations and frankly for our planet at this point. So it's our time to rise up. No one's going to tell you to. You got to do it on your own. All right, take care, guys.